I have relocated back to the Golden State as I am teaching the semester Constitutional Law 1 and 2. And I'm back on the West Coast until April. And so I bring you that West Coast vibe as we get ready for Kamala for California, because I thought it's inevitable she's going to run for governor. Hope your new year is coming to a wonderful climax and close. I hope you have a great party planned for tomorrow night. We have a great show planned for you tomorrow. In 2 weeks, I move to the afternoon drive in the east, noontime drive in the west. So I'll be on 3 to 6 p.m. beginning January 13th, Monday, January 13th. And that's noon to 3 out west for the Steelers fans who are traveling, though I don't think many of them do. I do want you to make sure that you follow me there. I'm looking forward to the afternoon. By 6 p.m. in the east, all the news that's going to happen has usually happened, absent disasters like the terrible and horrible plane crashes of the weekend. We'll talk about that. I want to begin, though, by telling you I arrived on Saturday back to California with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt. Yesterday on Sunday, I was able to visit Sue and Dennis Prager. I want to bring you a full update on that. But I want to begin, actually, with Dennis's brother, Dr. Kenneth Prager. Did a conversation with Marissa Street, who's the CEO of Prager University. If you haven't been to PragerU, visit Prager, Prageru.com, PragerU. You can watch the whole conversation. But rather than have a layman and a dummy when it comes to medicine like me trying to explain Dennis's injury, I thought we would grab some from the Kenneth Prager interview with Marissa over at PragerU, let you hear from him, and then I'll tell you how it went yesterday. Here is Dr. Kenneth Prager and Marissa Street. Cut number
Obviously, I
9.
was shocked, as was the entire family, when I heard about his accident. So in terms of a spinal cord injury of this nature, I am unfortunately all too familiar with this because my son Joshua had the exact same spinal cord injury, C3, C4, the third and fourth cervical spinal segments. So I know a lot about spinal cord injury, and ironically, Dennis and my father, Max, the last 2 years of his life, had a spinal cord injury. That was as a result of a medical procedure when he was 94 years old, when he had to have an aortic valve replaced, and it resulted in a stroke in the spinal cord. So 3 close members of my family, immediate family, spinal cord injuries. When somebody has a spinal cord injury in the area that Dennis has, it affects the nerves that go to the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the major muscle of respiration. It does most of the work of breathing. If the diaphragm is weakened as a result of the nerves that go to it being impaired, as they would be in a spinal cord injury, your breathing is impaired. And the fact, though, that Dennis is making significant progress in getting off the ventilator is a very good sign, and very hopeful that he will ultimately be entirely liberated from the ventilator and be able to talk and even resume his radio shows at some point. That is obviously our hope. His mind is fine. Having said that, there's also, of course, the problem of movement and the paralysis. And so right now, Dennis does not move his arms or legs. And
that is the whole of it. Dennis suffered a C3, C4 spinal injury of unknown duration. Don't know how long it's going to go on for. He's off the ventilator. I went and spent an hour with him yesterday. Dennis could have 20 people visiting him at any time, so you got to kind of work through Sue when you go. And I spent an hour with him yesterday. He is as funny as ever, only a different kind of funny because he can't talk yet. He has talked a little bit and hopes to be back. He doesn't want any false optimism about when, but he hopes to be back in Q1 sometime on the air. Dennis, if Dennis can talk, Dennis will be fine. I've said that from the day I heard about his injury. And he looked so much better than I expected because I've been getting secondhand reports from Sue, from Alan Estrin, from everyone in the immediate aftermath of his accident 6 weeks ago. I didn't know what to expect. And all it was Dennis without talking. And so Dennis in a bed, and he can't move. It'll be a while till we figure out the extent of how much movement he has, except his head and his very, very lively face. Dennis can, as any of those of you who have ever done an event with Dennis, and I've done hundreds of events with Dennis. We did our first Ask a Jew event, probably a decade ago at Mariners church down in Orange County, California, and I was amazed at how many people like those events, and now they've kind of expanded out. Dennis and I did a half dozen of them. Now he does them with many people. Turns out lots of Protestants, Catholics, and every kind of sect you want, Muslims, agnostic, atheists, along with you, come to hear Dennis in the Ask a Jew program, and I look forward to doing with him again. I was so pleased, and a few things I made notes. Dennis wanted everyone to know that for years people would ask him, how are you doing? He'd say, better than my country. Now he says, well, my country is doing better than me because Donald Trump is back and I am on my back. But he is very, very upbeat about the country. Of course, he's consuming news 24/7. He doesn't have a priority for the president-elect. He thinks a lot of things will have to be done. He does think Hegseth is going to be confirmed, by the way, rather easily. He watches a lot of CNN. So that's one of the handful of viewers that they've got left is Dennis Prager. He doesn't want to convey false optimism. He does not want certitude about movement to be out there. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. He is, of course, encouraged by the fact that his nephew, Dr. Prager's son, had the same injury to the C3, C4 area of his spine and is back walking and is a great journalist now. But it is a long recovery time. If Dennis can talk in 3 months, he'll be doing his broadcasting. He has been a radio artist for as long as I've been doing it, 30 years. I told him yesterday we were doing some reminiscing. I first heard Dennis in 1989. So I moved to California after the Reagan administration, and Dennis Prager was the invited guest of the Lincoln Club in Orange County. There are many different kinds of Lincoln Club. The Lincoln Club of Orange County is a powerhouse in California. Bach Johns, Doy Henley. They invited Dennis Prager, and I had gotten to know Tom Fuentes and Buck Johns and Doy Henley and a bunch of players in Orange County in the 90s, 89, and they had invited me to a Lincoln Club lunch. And a guy named Dennis Prager shows up and blows me away with erudition, humor, presence, energy. He's not unlike Trump when it comes to energy. Dennis just is a huge life force. And I walked out of there not knowing that my life would be inextricably intertwined with Dennis for many years, but it has been. He's just a dear friend. And Dennis likes to always hug me because he knows I just hate being hugged. I'm not a hugger. But I walked in yesterday and I planted a kiss on his head and he smiled broadly and we had a chat about that. Only Dennis would get that from me and Sue, of course. And so he could have friends, the most interesting friends in the world, day in and day out there, but he does need his time. I left after an hour. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt's rule is 30 minutes to anyone who's sick. Don't go longer. They get exhausted. They don't want to be rude. And he likes people. That's all he wants. When are you coming back? I said, you tell me, I'll be back. And I'm just so happy that I can say on the new year, he is every bit the Dennis that we all knew. No listlessness, no sometimes recoveries lead people to losing energy. He has not lost any energy. His face is so mobile and expressive and he mouths words. I'm not so good at reading lips. It takes a while. But he does have a laser and he can point. It's just that it's going to take a while. And it was explained to me as a sort of, imagine getting into shape. You got to get your diaphragm back into shape. When you've been on a ventilator, you've got to learn how to breathe again and you got to learn how to talk again. He'll be able to do that. That's going to be great. I want you to know Marissa Street and all the people at PragerU will keep you posted with more detailed things like Dr. Prager. Don't play doctor. Don't talk about him on, people who post anything about Dennis end up getting trolled. It's harmful. It's hurtful to Sue and the family. So I'm not going to post anything about it. But I do want you to know he is fabulous, in great spirits, and thanks, all of you. And I'll figure out, those of you who have the universe can send me subtext messages for Dennis. We'll figure out a way that his friends can get to him and his fans, the people whose lives he's touched and changed. We'll find a way for you to get to him via message without having to deal with the trolls and bots that are the termites of the internet, the moth and the flies and the bugs of the internet. We'll figure out a way for you to convey and communicate with Dennis. But the good news is He is happy. He is recovering. He is of sound mind and returning to sound body. And we'll keep you posted back out in Studio West, where I will be back broadcasting for the next 4 months. I teach con law every other year, and I may go back to every year soon. I don't know. I do it every other year so that every law student at the Fowler School of Law at Chapman University has a chance to have an originalist. And I have torn up the old playbook. The old playbook was based upon an old court, and so much has changed. Just since I last taught, I last finished teaching in April of 2023. So it's been almost 2 years of court decision, and the court's radical and correct change in direction back to the new originalism. What was the public meaning of this provision of the original Constitution or its amendment at the time it was adopted? What was the original meaning of this statute at the time it was adopted? It's called the new originalism, that I've just thrown out the old playbook and all the old case books, and looking forward to going back to teaching. But I'll be out here until at least April, and I will keep you posted on Dennis like I did. I'll be looking forward to seeing him often through this phase of his recovery and getting him back on. Now, I do want to say a couple words about Jimmy Carter. I lived every minute of the Carter presidency, and my condolences to his family. I knew Amy from 2 meetings of presidential library directors and families, and I've done the Nixon Library gig twice, and there was no Carter Library at the time. There is now, and so I got together with her, and she's very, very pleasant, and I'm sure breaks her heart to have lost both of her parents in a year. And Jimmy Carter at 100 had fought the good fight, Christian man. He was wrong on so much that I could spend the rest of the show telling you is wrong. The difference between, he's not the worst president of my lifetime, that is Joe Biden, easily. Because after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Jimmy Carter got religion on communism. He had been warning, why do Americans have the inordinate fear of communism? And he got the Malays speech, even though he didn't use the word Malays, and the killer rabbit, and all the indignities of his presidency, fainting during a run, all of the disappointments that went. He was a nice man most of the time. He was virulently anti-Israel in his post-presidency. You can choose to view the Habitat for Humanity Jimmy Carter and say thumbs up, or the anti-Israel Jimmy Carter and say thumbs down. I did have the opportunity to interview him, I believe, twice. He was prolific with books, but unlike Richard Nixon's books, they didn't sell very well. And I watched the Jimmy Carter presidency both as a college student, the youth director for Ford in Massachusetts in 1976, so he lost to Jimmy Carter. Can't deny that. He beat an incumbent president. It's hard to do. And Jimmy Carter then just was so naive about the world that it was almost impossible to overstate how naive he was about the world. He was a peanut farmer. He had been a nuclear submariner. He was a smart guy. He was a devout Christian man, but he just truly did not like Israel. I will wait for the commentary podcast to have them remind people how anti-Israel he was, especially in his retirement. But he did do a lot of good. He raised a lot of money. He said a lot of inane things in his presidency and his post-presidency. But generally, all of us fall well short of the glory of God, and so we really ought not to criticize. But he is at rest, and we're happy for him. I do want to play for you a little bit of Joe Biden talking about him yesterday in St. Croix, cut number 1.
Married President Carter for so many years. You know, Jimmy Carter stands as a model of what it means to live a life of meaning and purpose, life of principle, faith, and humility. His life dedicated to others. You know, he's like my dad. He thought that, he said, Joe, your job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about dignity, your dignity. About being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, everything's going to be okay. He believed, as I do, and many as you do, that that's absolutely possible. It's within our grasp.
See what's going on here. President Biden is impaired. And so he's told, he knows who Jimmy Carter is. He knows he's got to make a statement. He's got a teleprompter. He goes off prompter and lapses into one of the greatest hits on his 8-track tape. And the 8-track tape is skipping. So we got some back to Joey and the paycheck. He went out to talk about Jimmy Carter, and there's more. I'll play a little bit more for Vic Mattis coming up. But our hats are off to the Carter family. He did accomplish Camp David Accord. That was a big deal. And then he turned against Israel in his retirement. Bad thing. Otherwise, the second worst president ever, the worst being the guy you just heard. And I don't think it's close. Joe Biden won going away. As I'll talk with Vic Mattis about Stay Tuned America. Joined by Vic Mattis, still inside the Beltway, the Washington Free Beacon's weekend editor and co-host of the Getting Hammered podcast. Happy New Year in advance, Vic Mattis. How was your Christmas?
Happy New Year, Hugh. Had a wonderful Christmas. The first part with my wife, Kate's family here, and then we went up to New Jersey, saw my father and my sister's family. I did not see any drones, but we were hanging out with my good friends, Sue and Rich. They see them all the time, they say. They live near McGuire Air Force Base, so it's now become a common sighting, and let's hope that those are American drones, but nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Did you think that the attention to the drones rather dramatically dropped after news began to happen?
Yeah, these things happen, and people who are operating the drones, certainly they're not as excited to fly them out to check out the other drones and so the traffic, just both in terms of the chatter and in terms of I think what people have been seeing, seems to have dropped, but certainly around areas of security and that sort of interest. That's still very important for us to figure out because, my friends talk to people who they swear that they see the drones fly out towards the ocean from Point Pleasant. I don't know. I mean, this is just what they're saying. That's not good. So we need to figure out what's happening here.
So, Vic, let's talk about some things we do know happened. Jimmy Carter died yesterday. I don't know where you were. I spent the first half of that horrible presidency in college, the second half with Richard Nixon in his exile at San Clemente, watching it unfold. And so I have Nixon's running commentary on Carter in my head. Where were you and what? You're younger than I am by a lot. You were probably in grade school when Jimmy Carter was president. Do you have any recollections of those years at all?
That's a good question, Hugh, and a good point. Thank you for not saying that I was in college at the time. No, I was. Yeah, thank you. I was in first grade, and I watched a lot of news as a kid, and so the TV was always on. I watched talk shows. I was weird that way. But one of the things I remember is there was a constant talk at the time of inflation, long gas lines, and then the Iranian hostage crisis. And I think every day, and I watch TV about every day, it was always about the Iranian hostage crisis. And then there was a brief moment where I remember hearing about Anwar Sadat. But largely, those are the three things that I associated with Jimmy Carter. And so we were very excited. Our house is very excited about the 1980 election. I know my parents were talking about Reagan. And I remember the next day going to school and poking fun at an older girl when I asked if she voted for Reagan or Carter, and she voted for some guy named John Anderson. And I thought,
oh my goodness, that's a blast from the past. He was a third party ticket. He really was. When we go back to the specifics of the Carter presidency, Vic, now that you study him as an adult, I up until Joe Biden's years, I thought that Jimmy Carter's presidency was the worst of modern presidents, not as bad as James Buchanan, who led to the breakup of the United States. And we probably had an inevitability of civil war over slavery built into the system. So I'm not even sure I'm going to blame Buchanan for that. But in modern times, there was just nobody as bad as Jimmy Carter. And it was a long 4 years, but not as long as these 4 years. And we still have, 22 days to go? I cannot wait to get to Donald Trump. How about you?
Yeah. When you look at the two 4-year terms of these two Democratic presidents, you're right. I mean, it was no question for the longest time. Anytime anybody referred to Jimmy Carter, it was as the worst president we've had in modern times. And certainly back then, there was many reasons to believe that. I mean, you had the bungling of the Iranian hostage situation and his support for the Shah or lack of support for the Shah. And then you had the economic policies as well. And of course his dealing with the Soviets, and which led to the invasion of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan on his watch, and then some of the policies that he realized, as you know, were just too little, too late, like turning around the U.S. military, but and it was legitimate, as they call it, the crisis of confidence at the time. But we have a crisis of confidence now, Hugh, and it's coming from within the White House, from a president who Jimmy Carter was very well meaning. He was earnest. He was a good public servant. There are a lot of questions about Joe Biden, things and revelations that are coming up now, certainly about his enriching himself, or allegations of his enriching himself, his knowledge of his son Hunter Biden's dealings with the Chinese, and of course, just his mental well being. Uh, these are problems now that are worse than they were when Jimmy Carter was our president. So you're right, and there's only a few more weeks to go. Even everything from the pardons that President Biden has been allowing to go on. Just a very disturbing situation, and
Yeah.
they can't. January 20 can't come soon enough.
I want to read to you what the spin is going to be on the Biden presidency. But first, I do want to note for the record that when Jimmy Carter lost, he dutifully supported Ronald Reagan in everything he asked him. For example, Reagan asked Jimmy Carter to go with Richard Nixon to the funeral of the Shah in Egypt that Anwar Sadat hosted for the exiled Shah, and Jimmy Carter and the former President Nixon went, and they put aside their differences. We're not going to get anything out of Joe Biden. We're not going to get even. Jimmy Carter was really anti-Israel in his retirement, but
Yeah.
we're not going to get anything out of Joe Biden. Now, here is Jake Sullivan. Now, Jake has been proven to be the biggest disappointment of this. I don't know him. My friend Robert O'Brien knows him well, thought very well of him coming in because he is a very smart guy. But he was interviewed on Friday of last week, and the Washington Post dutifully acted as stenographer for how they're going to spin this presidency. Jake Sullivan said, quote, "The president has been operating on a time horizon measured in decades, while the political cycle is measured in 4 years." Sullivan added that his accomplishments will take a long time to bear fruit. Quote, "How to govern at this moment to set the U.S. up for long-term success as one answer. How to govern to deal with midterm and presidential elections, the very short term, might have a different answer. The president went with doing things that really put America in a strong position." All right, I have lots to think and say about that, Vic, but you get to go first.
Okay, bear with me here, Hugh. My first thought is, he's basically saying we won't know for another 100 years. So, let's just assume that it's all going to go well. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you that you might be right or wrong. The first thing that I thought about when I heard this line from Jake Sullivan was a line from the movie In the Line of Fire, the movie with Clint Eastwood, and John Malkovich plays the assassin. And he's in disguise, and he's with these fundraisers and bundlers, and he's trying to convince them that he's this businessman. So he's having what he thinks is a business conversation to wow them. And one of the things he says in this movie, he goes, "Well, we think in the next fiscal quarter, but the Japanese think in the next quarter century." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so deep." And I think he's trying to pull a fast one on us like that. So no, I'm not buying it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the Nixon quote was, "Americans think in decades, the Russians think in generations, and the Chinese think in centuries." And Nixon was right. But what Jake Sullivan is doing here is, I don't have anything to point to as an accomplishment. So I'm just telling you, it'll take years to find out. Maybe we have a super duper secret weapon that we haven't unveiled yet. What do you think, Vic? Could that be it? That,
Yeah.
we've revolutionized cyber warfare, but we can't tell anyone?
Again, we'll only know in 100 years from now. No, don't hold your breath, Hugh, on that one, because if you think about everything that's happening around the world, remember Jake Sullivan, of course, famously said that it was on their watch that the Middle East it's never been as peaceful as it had been, and that was in the fall of 2023. So, they can't point to anything. They don't want to mention Afghanistan. They went out of their way. If you remember the administration, and certainly when Biden was still running for president, he was wary to mention the word Afghanistan. He even went so far as to say no Americans had died on his watch. I mean, it's delusional. So there's not much that they can point to. It's got to be all abstract. That's what they're working with over here.
You and Mary Catherine are always very diplomatic on getting hammered. But now the question is out in the open. How long has President Biden had mental impairment? Not a question of if, it's a question of when. Some people say it began in the spring of 2021. Others say it began in the basement campaign but was effectively hidden from view. Last question, what do you think, Vic Mattis, about when the president ought really not to have been the president?
Well, that's the thing. We only know what we know, Hugh, which is and props again to Annie Linsky and the reporters at the Wall Street Journal. Better late than never, reporting this story with the 50 people who wanted to go on and off the record, talking about the president's unwellness. And what we know now is it goes back to 2021. So that's the best that I can say, is that you can go back to 2021. He shouldn't have been president back then. The basement campaign, very curious. They like to blame it on COVID. President Trump was going out as much as he could as possible, but
do you
it's
think,
not good.
Quick bonus, do you think it's the greatest media scandal in history? Because I do.
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's bigger than the PolitiFact lie of the year, which had to do with Springfield, Ohio, and the eating of dogs and cats. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, well said. Vic Mattis, always a pleasure. Looking forward to my Getting Hammered podcast, non-drinking edition, because I don't drink. But I'm looking forward to this week, Vic. So you and MKH, Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Happy New Year, Hugh.
Friend. Selena is sick, it turns out, and I am not surprised. I was too. I'm on the tail end of being ill. I want to thank Ed Morrissey, Dwayne Patterson for filling in for me after Christmas. This is what happens when you go and play with grandkids, especially 2-year-olds. And I'm not sure who the villain is in passing the virus to me. Everybody, every single person in one of the households was sick. And so I saw all the grandkids, and I just didn't want the baby. There's a new baby grandchild. Did not want the baby to get sick, so I didn't hold her. I can't blame her. I can blame pretty much everyone else, but I think it was T-Rex Teddy who sneezed in my face 25 times. So I am with Selena. She did the 17 fishes as well, so she's exhausted and sick. And so we'll give her a pass. If you want a pass to the inauguration, and I am not going to be in D.C. for the inauguration, but we are doing a contest for listeners. 2 tickets to the inauguration, 2 tickets to the inaugural ball. If you text the word Trump to 94878, you will be entered in our contest. Trump, Trump, 94878. A trip for 2 to Washington, D.C. to the Trump inauguration and to the inaugural ball. We'll pay for it all at Salem. Give yourself a shot to go. Some people have longed to go for their whole lives. I've done that, been there and done that. I'm not a big fan of sitting in the Arctic cold, but it could also be, it's D.C. in January, it literally could be 50 degrees. The second Reagan inauguration was so cold that they moved it indoors, and that was our one inauguration that just proved to me never go to an inaugural parade. But you might want to, and you might want to be absolutely inspired by the return of the 45th president to the 47th president, and you may want to enter by entering Trump, Trump, to 94878. Just text Trump to 94878. I want to do 2 more thank yous today and tomorrow on behalf of the children served by Angel Tree and Ministry of Prison Fellowship to the children of prisoners. You folks came through in a big way, a huge way, and you can continue to do so. Some of you are making year-end deductions to gather in you're making year-end contributions to gather in your tax deductions. Angel Tree absolutely qualifies for that. The banner is still up at the top of HughHewitt.com. And we're not doing Christmas presents, obviously. Now we will begin to transition to summer camping. Angel Tree does 2 big operations. They get kids to camp in the summer, and they give Christmas to the children of prisoners this time of year. And so when I was asking you for $30, that was because that was the cost of taking care of one child with a gift, a note from mom or dad or both parents if they're in jail, and a Bible and a connection to Angel Tree. That connection goes on all year long because of volunteers, but there is overhead that goes on. More importantly, we got to get ready for camping now. So if you want to make a year-end tax-deductible contribution to Angel Tree, do so over at the banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. That's the easiest way to do it. absolutely effective, absolutely gets there. Thank you in advance for doing that. Let me spend a moment talking to you about besthotgrill.com, because I'll see Rhett and Irene Rasmussen soon, sometime in the next quarter, 4 months that I'm teaching. Never miss catching up with our friends. And when I do, we'll talk about Best Hot Grill in the year that they've had. I'll find out. I think they are recession proof. I think people need grills the year round. Even Browns fans need grills. By the way, the Browns had a great weekend. Not only did they lose, but the Giants won incredibly. So now, under the Tankathon, and that's where you go find out draft order for 2025, the Browns are in the third pole position, which is great. We're either going to get QB1 or we're going to get the wide receiver from Colorado. So I don't know which one it's going to be, whether they get Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, or is it Travis Hunter? I don't know, the kid that does amazing thing, the Heisman Trophy winner. One of those three, if they draft in the top three. Of course, they got to lose the last game. It's the Ravens, and the Ravens have something to play for. So I think the Browns probably will lose, since it's also in Baltimore. What a grim season. But it has set us up to move beyond the Watson era of dysfunction and disaster by picking a QB1 in the draft. And whether it's a second-round QB or one of the top two, there are only two first-round worthy QBs according to the draft. I don't know. Dane Brugler doesn't tell me anything. But I know that Sanders and Ward are considered 1 and 2. So people may be trading up and down. They may not be on the board for the Browns at 3 or 4. But there's a lot of talent in the top 5. And if they just end up with boring offensive linemen or tight ends, I'm happy. But I'll be seeing Rhett and Irene. And I'll check in on besthotgrill.com. I want you to know, if you got a gift at the end of the year, and you want to spend it on yourself, you're tired of taking care of other people, then go to besthotgrill.com and get ready for spring. Because we are now going to start leaning into 2025, even though it's 2 days away and it's December 30th. And the best way to lean in is to prepare to grill. I'm back on the West Coast. I've got my Best Hot Grill. We'll begin using it. We didn't use it last night. There's no food at Hewitt Casa West. And so we will be using it this week, and I want you to investigate getting yourself the best grill made in America, besthotgrill.com. Heats up instantly using solar infrared technology, absolutely delivers the very best beef. And I don't know, some people do fish. I don't eat fish. I think fish is a waste of a meal. But if you're going to go for the beef, like going to Gulliver's, but you want to do it at home, go to besthotgrill.com today and enjoy for the rest of the year. Give yourself a year-end present at besthotgrill.com. Come January 13th, we move to morning drive. We move to afternoon drive on the East Coast, noon to 3 on the West Coast. When I was visiting Dennis Prager yesterday in the hospital, he had other visitors who are very excited about that, as all my California friends are. They've missed us for 8 years. They've listened to the podcast, as you can, Highly Concentrated Hugh. They've missed Dwayne even, and you can listen to Dwayne's World if you want Dwayne. And if you join the universe, you get the after show as well. But we're going to be moving in 2 weeks, so I have exactly 9 shows left at this ungodly hour of the morning out west. And everybody in Team Hewitt has got champagne bottles sitting next to their desks as they get ready to move to what is a 12 to 3 production schedule with a couple hours before and a couple hours after. It's just a lot more livable than the vampire ship, which they've been doing for the past 8 years. And I salute Harley and Adam for doing that. Dwayne, when he has come in, has rolled in around 5. Today he came in early. He wanted to get the update on Dennis, so it's good to have him here. I have a New Year's resolution. I'm going to cut back on TV, although I had fun with Trey Gowdy last night. Let's play my hit from last night with Trey on Sunday Night in America, cut number 4.
For answers, let's turn to a student of history, but a man firmly planted in the present, the host of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Mr. Hugh Hewitt. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us. I'm big on setting realistic expectations because it tends to tap down disappointment later on. What are realistic expectations given the narrow margins and the different constituencies within the GOP?
Well, Congressman, good evening. Happy New Year in advance to you. Let me say that I don't really have a lot of expectations beyond the first reconciliation and budget packet. Now, you're the alum of Congress. I've just been on the outside looking in. It's a very bizarre process. I couldn't explain it in an hour, nor could you in two, if we had all that time to explain it, but it's very bizarre. I think Donald Trump will get one big win this year. I hope it includes in it a wall on the border, like Stephen Miller's been talking about, an expanded ICE, an expanded Border Patrol. I would like very much to see a rebuild of the American military get underway, and I want those tax cuts extended and made permanent. Now, the Budget Control Act of 1974, which you probably know, you probably have memorized, Congressman, it's so complicated that it makes it very difficult to get what I just said done. But if they're going to get it done, and Donald Trump promised to get it done, they got to do it in January or February, I think.
Do we start with the border, or do we start with taxes, which are about to expire? And I'm sure most of our viewers, you are wondering, why can't you do both? I mean, why do you have to do one this year and one the next? So if you have to pick, would you start with the border or would you start with taxes?
If it was up to me, I would start with taxes for a very simple reason, Congressman. I'm a Republican, you're a Republican. We lose the Congress in 2026 if the economy's not cooking. And while I realize immigration was a huge issue, it was the second most important issue to Americans, the first most important issue was the economy and inflation. So I would lock in those tax cuts, let small businesses know what their effective rate's going to be, let them know what they get to write off on their CapEx expenditure, lock it all down, make sure they get their pass-throughs guaranteed. And the President-elect Trump wants to get rid of taxes on tips, doesn't want to tax Social Security benefits. Whatever they do, I would do it first so everyone could get booming again like we were right before COVID hit, back to the Trump boom 2.0. But I know, I think Stephen Miller is pretty close to the president, and all he ever talks about is the biggest border deal ever. And I assume that means the rest of the wall, a huge deportation of the million-plus people who've got deportation orders already on them, expansion of Border Patrol. So I think they're going to do the border first. I wish they would do taxes first, and I don't know why they can't do both first.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers are wondering that exact same thing. All right, let's move to the world stage. You got Eastern Europe, the Middle East with the fall of Syria, China. What is Hugh Hewitt going to be watching early on in 2025?
I'm going to be seeing if Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump resume the momentum they had at the end of the first Trump term, get the Abraham Accords stood up again, bring Saudi Arabia in, and finally begin to push at the paper-mache regime of Iran. And I believe that Israel has demonstrated through the destruction of Hezbollah in large, Hamas almost completely, the Houthis in significant part, that Iran really is a paper tiger. So that's number one. Do Netanyahu and Trump get things going together? And then number two, what happens with the president's promise to get a special envoy into Ukraine, working on a ceasefire and some kind of a deal that might see some territorial swaps where the Russians retreat from Ukrainian territory, the Ukrainians retreat from Russian territory, and they stop killing each other. Finally, but this is a four-year concern, Congressman Gotti, is China. And they are continuing to threaten Taiwan on an almost monthly basis. Does Donald Trump sit down with Xi Jinping and say, let's knock this off and try and grow our own home economies for the benefit of our people? Don't know how successful he'll be. He'll be a lot more successful than Joe Biden, though.
All right, you and I both remember Ronald Reagan. That was one version of conservatism. Donald Trump has elements of the old GOP, but there's a dash of populism, both in personal appeal but also in policy. How would you describe the new Republican Party to someone who hasn't and doesn't study politics?
The new Republican Party is a combination of Barry Goldwater's party, Richard Nixon's party, Ronald Reagan's party, and he went and brought in a whole bunch of Democrats who were never part of the Republican Party ever. It's a much bigger accumulation of interest groups, but the same old elements of the Reagan coalition, the party of free enterprise and business, the party of faith, people for whom their faith is their number one deal. And then you've got the party of national security. Those three parties are still all there. The only thing that is really new is the countryside versus the capital stuff. A lot of Americans, when I was working for Reagan in the White House back in the 80s, Americans weren't really angry at Washington. They might have been upset with its inefficiency. Now they're just very, very angry with the almost impossible to overcome paralysis in the nation's capital. So he brought in that populist element. But I don't think it's that different, Trey Gowdy, do you? I mean, you weren't around in the 80s, but it seems to me like it's the same people on the same ramparts most of the time.
No, I think they both have built coalitions that the media did not think they would be capable of building, and I think they both fought through headwinds, different headwinds, but they both fought through headwinds. So there are similarities. There are a little more populism, I think, arguably in the new GOP, and we'll see if they pick taxes or border. How's that?
I hope that comes to pass. I look forward to it, Congressman. Happy New Year to you.
Yes, sir. Merry Christmas.
I got to tell you, thank you to all of you who noticed I was wearing my Hillsdale tie last night. John Miller, who runs the Dow Center for Journalism at Hillsdale, and I were at dinner the last time I was at Hillsdale, along with President Arnn and Professor O'Toole and many of our friends from Hillsdale. And I was getting jabbed by Larry, as is typical. Why don't you wear the Hillsdale tie ever? And the Hillsdale tie is an H. I said, Larry, I can't wear a tie with an H on television because people will think it's a Hugh Hewitt tie because my logo's HH. Everything's been HH my whole life. And I can't do that. I can't wear an H. That's so self-referential, even though it's not. John Miller disappeared and came back in about 2 minutes. A great journalist that he is. He had immediately figured out there's a different Hillsdale tie. There's a Hillsdale tie that spells out Hillsdale. And so I got that, and I put it on. I got to wear it with Trey Gowdy last night, so finally got to wear my Hillsdale tie. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Yes, Larry Arnn will be moving with me to Fridays at 5 p.m. in the East and 2 p.m. in the West. So the Hillsdale Dialogue is moving along with me, and I hope most of my guests as well. Don't go anywhere. Today and tomorrow I'm talking about the story of the year, which has to be President Trump's reelection. It's the greatest political comeback in American history. It's not even close. Richard Nixon held that title until Donald Trump won in November. The second biggest story, and it's really the biggest story of the decade thus far, is the cover-up of Joe Biden's impairment. Annie Linsky and her team deserve a Pulitzer. And, of course, it was hiding in plain sight, and I've said it for 3 years. He was infirm. We did not know the extent of his mental impairment or the cover-up until the Wall Street Journal laid it out there. And more will be forthcoming. You can't hide this stuff forever. And the president is in the Bahamas. Great. I hope he stays on vacation until January 20th. Just understand, he's not deciding anything. All right? He's not competent to be president. He ought to have resigned early in his term when the impairment became obvious. Instead, they decided to shoot the moon. And because of an ill-begotten promise to name a black woman to the ticket, we ended up with Kamala Harris. I suppose the good news in all this is that we get Donald Trump back in a landslide win. But the bad news is the American media failed comprehensively. The good news is the Trump inauguration is 20 days away, 22 days away. If you want to attend that inauguration, we are having a contest. You cannot go if you do not enter. Text the name Trump, T-R-U-M-P, to 94878. 94878. Trump to 94878. 2 tickets to the inauguration, 2 tickets to the inaugural ball that night, and all expenses paid by Salem. 1 person will win, 2 people will go, but you can't enter unless you text Trump to 94878. Let me also remind you over at HughHewitt.com, the Angel Tree banner is up, because some of you look around at the end of the year and say, oh my goodness, I got to make some tax deductions. I need to make some contributions. We have 5 fingers for a reason, right? 5 things. 1, you donate to your church. 2, a parachurch ministry, like Angel Tree. 3, a school that did well by you. In my case, it's John F. Kennedy High School in Warren, Ohio. Whenever they ask, I give. 4, a school you have nothing to do with, who's doing great work out there. It can be a local private school that's struggling or standing up, a new classical school. You can go to hillsdale.edu and contribute there. If you want to give a building, do it to Hillsdale, because that'll still be there in 100 and 200 and 300 and 400 years. They'll still be doing the same thing, which is classical liberal education. Hillsdale.edu for a year-end gift. And then 5, a charity that serves our veterans. My favorite is thefund.org. I hold 2 fundraisers for them a year on Veterans Day and Memorial Day. I'll continue to do that when I move to the afternoons on January 13th 3 to 6 in the afternoon on the East Coast, driving you home, noon to 3 on the West Coast, coast to coast, in every major market. I will be there for you, bringing you breaking news. And that breaking news matters a great deal all the time, and I always include a market update. The market update today is brought to you by, of course, AmericanFederal.com. AmFed Coin and Bullion have been doing this forever. They buy and sell gold. You have to call them at 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. I walked into a jewelry store before Christmas and I said, whoa, the prices. Because gold is up at $2,626 today. And the Dow on Friday was off 0.77%. The S&P was off 1.11%. And the NASDAQ was down 1.5%. Gold is at $2,626 an ounce this morning. Got to get ready to buy my year-end gold, which is when I do it. Some people buy gold every month. Other people do it once a year. I do it once a year. And I do it with AmericanFederal.com. I got to call Nick Grovich and his team, figure out how to get the money over to Nick and get the gold sent back to me. And that's what you do. You call 1-800-221-7694. AmericanFederal.com. I don't know when Trump will conquer inflation, because productivity conquers inflation. And when the tax cuts are extended and we get going, everything will be fine. Time to get some gold for Hugh. AmericanFederal.com. Come January 13th, I've been getting up every morning at 4:30 for many years to get ready to bring you the news in the morning. But on January 13th, I am moving to the afternoon drive in the East because all the news that's going to happen in America is usually done by 5 p.m., and it usually breaks late in the day, and I will be there to bring you breaking news Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 in the West, 3 to 6 in the East, noon to 3 in the West. One of the things I get to do is I sweep the internet for newsy things that happened over the weekend, and former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, a very good friend of mine, in fact, I'm spending next weekend with him, I think. Robert didn't tell me he was going to do Fox News with Jason Chaffetz yesterday, but he did, and Robert has the ear of everyone on Team Trump, including the once and future president. He doesn't want to go back in. He's done his time, his years before the mast. But he, by saying go back in, I mean do a second Trump term. But he's available, and the former and future president talks to Robert often. So whatever he says, you ought to stop and listen to very closely. He and Alex Gray, probably the most important outside voices for being heard inside the new administration. So here's Robert with Jason Chaffetz yesterday, cut number 8.
How is Trump going to deal with things differently with China? What's at the top of the agenda?
Well, Happy New Year, Jason. Thank you for having me on. Look, I think you just saw one of the President Trump's great decisions during the transition was appointing Mike Waltz to be the new National Security Advisor. Mike's going to be a terrific NSA. He's going to bring strength back. He's a former Green Beret. And between Mike Waltz and President Trump, you're not going to have the foreign dictators and terrorists pushing America around the way they have the last 4 years. And that goes to Hamas. I mean, the fact that Iran and Hamas have taken all these American hostages, that on October 7th they killed 40 Americans in the October 7th attack, and have faced no repercussions for it. In fact, we've been paying Iran ransom for hostages and doing sanctions relief on Iran. And Tony Blinken's been having tea with the Hamas leaders in Doha. So that's all going to end when President Trump comes into power. And but what I've said is that the Hamas leaders, both in Gaza and outside of Gaza, if they don't release the American hostages, my guess is they're going to end up like Baghdadi with a Belgian Malinois military working dog chasing them down a tunnel, and that'll be the last thing they see in their life if they don't let those American hostages go. And the fact that you've got President Trump and Mike Waltz saying that, openly, watch out, Hamas, if you don't let those Americans, if you don't free the Americans immediately.
No, I also want to go to the second part, because a lot of people have been jabbing at Trump because of his Panama Canal comments. I knew exactly what he was doing, and I mentioned it to Brett last week when I was sitting in on Special Report. But Robert explained it at length. Here's Ambassador O'Brien talking with Jason Chaffetz about the Panama Canal post at number 9.
I also want to ask you about China's role in the Panama Canal, because almost seemingly out of nowhere, you've got Donald Trump talking about the Panama Canal. I didn't see many stories written about that last year. Why the sudden urgency in taking on the Panama Canal?
Well, Jason, as you know, the Panama Canal is one of the engineering achievements of the last millennia, and we built it, we paid for it, and we operated it for many years. And then, in a tremendous act of generosity, it was probably foolish. Jimmy Carter gave the canal back to the Panamanians, but it wasn't just a free gift. There are conditions that the canal remain neutral. And so what the Panamanians have done, and generally we love the Panamanians, they're good people, they're friends of America, but they gave the ports on both ends of the canal to the Chinese. And even the New York Times is saying, which has been an apologist for China for years, is saying that the Chinese are committing espionage, or they could shut down the canal without military efforts, just using these Hong Kong companies that control the canal. And then on top of that, they're raising the prices on American shipping. So 75% of the commerce that goes to the canal ends up at American ports or departs from American ports, and they're ripping us off. And so the idea that they've given the canal to China, basically, in essence, and are charging us high prices, and the Chinese are taking that and using that money to build their own military up, that doesn't work for America anymore. We're not going to be chumps. We love the Panamanian people. We're happy to have them run the canal, but they can't charge exorbitant prices to American taxpayers ultimately and consumers, and they can't let the Chinese have access to both ends of the canal and run the thing. That violates the neutrality provision of the Panama Canal Treaty, under which they got the canal back. So Donald Trump is the first person since Ronald Reagan, and there are so many parallels between Trump and Reagan. I talked about this when I was National Security Advisor on Peace Through Strength. Trump saw what's happening to the canal, and he says, we're not going to put up with it anymore. And the Panamanians can get with the program, or we may have to take the canal back.
Wow. Let's talk about Greenland, because President Trump's also talking actively about Greenland. What's the latest there?
Well, the latest is Greenland is a highway from the Arctic all the way to North America to the United States. It's strategically very important to the Arctic, which is going to be the critical battleground of the future, because as the climate gets warmer, the Arctic is going to be a pathway that maybe cuts down on the usage of the Panama Canal. And the Russians and Chinese are all over the Arctic. Now, the Kingdom of Denmark owns Greenland, and they've got an obligation to defend Greenland. And so President Trump said, if you don't defend Greenland, we'll buy it, and we'll defend it, but we're not going to defend it for free and let you and not develop Greenland and not extract the minerals and oil and resources of Greenland. And while we defend it, Denmark gets rich, and the King of Denmark becomes even wealthier. Denmark is now on the front lines of the war against Russia and China. They're like the Baltic states, they're like Poland, because of their vast territory in Greenland. And so they've got to defend Greenland, and if they can't defend it, we're going to have to, and we're not going to do it for free. So the Danes can either put the frigate that's necessary there, they can put the air wings, they can put the missiles in Greenland, and they can put the infantry there that they need to defend the country, just like the Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are doing in Eastern Europe. Or they can pay us to do it, and we'll do it, but they can cover the cost of the defense. Or if they don't want to do either of those things, they can let us buy Greenland from them, and Greenland can become part of Alaska. I mean, the native people in Greenland are very closely related to the people of Alaska, and we'll make it a part of Alaska. But they can't have it. The U.S. can't defend it for nothing, and the days of the U.S. taxpayer defending Western Europe and kingdoms in Europe and defending their empire for nothing. Those days are over, and we love the Danish people. They're great. Denmark's a wonderful place. Copenhagen is a wonderful city, but they've got to do their part. They can't have this vast empire and then not defend it and leave it to the U.S. to do it. So we're going to either buy it, they're going to defend it, or they can pay us to defend it. But it's no more free riding, even for people we love like the Danes.
Take that to the bank. When Ambassador O'Brien says Donald Trump believes X, that's what Donald Trump told him, because he talks to the former president all the time. Glad to see Robert O'Brien will be helping serious people navigate the next 4 years. Scott Jennings is a serious person. He should get combat pay over at CNN. He had a full hit with a eulogy for the Biden presidency, cut number 6.
But Joe Biden's record with regard to the things that he's accomplished, I think will stand the test of time. Now, what my dear friend Scott and others will talk about, and quite frankly, I'm going to say this, rightfully so, it was very disturbing to learn late in the year about just how how poor his health has become. And like many, I did not realize that it had gotten to that point. That being said, I think he showed up for the job. He got the work done. I think some of the accomplishments also in the Middle East and foreign policy will also stand the test of time.
You think the Middle East is in better shape today than when he took office?
Well, I think he got our hostages home. I think that's a big deal. I think it's important.
I'm sorry, which hostages?
He's gotten a number of people home. He was able.
There's still 100 people over there.
Well, there were more than
including some Americans. Look, I think he's gonna leave office in disgrace. The Hunter Biden pardon was disgraceful. He's going to be remembered largely for inflation and for the disastrous Afghanistan pullout. And I think as we continue to, we're just getting the first draft of this now, but as we continue to learn about the massive cover-up that went on, not about his health, but about his mental acuity, to cover that up, the efforts that were undertaken by the White House staff, by his family, not in the last couple of months, but for all 4 years, I think it's going to be a really ugly chapter. It's a diminished presidency because of it. And I think we still don't know the full extent of what they did to try to hide what they've been doing over in the West Wing.
So I think leaving in disgrace is when you have an insurrection at the Capitol. Like, that's leaving in disgrace. Being impeached twice is leaving in disgrace. So that's a difference. I think Joe Biden's going to be remembered in the short term for what you were talking about, whether or not he had the capacity to lead, who knew what when. I mean, there are many people outside of the very small network of Anita Dunn and Valerie Biden Owens and Jill Biden and Hunter. There aren't many people who knew the concerns that were there or whether or not he was up or fit for the job. And so those questions will be asked. Over the long term, this is somebody a lot like Mitch McConnell. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they stood for. You don't have to agree with every vote. But you always knew they put the American people first.
You know, Bakari Sellers is trying a spin that's impossible. He's trying to pick up a double split. There is no such thing in bowling. It's not possible to redeem the Biden presidency. It's not possible to cover up the cover-up. And if you didn't notice, if you've listened to the show, or you intend to start listening to it again when we go back to the afternoons in 2 weeks, whether it is, I've known since 2021 that Joe Biden was infirm. I have said it repeatedly. I called for his resignation last February. Everyone who has dealt with an aging parent knows. I think the question to Bakari Sellers is, when did you get concerned about the president? Was it really the Wall Street Journal story? Were you really that oblivious to that which was in front of you? To everyone who says, well, we didn't really know, you just have to say that's not true. Everybody knew. Very few people would say so. And when we got the cheap fakes cover-up, the deep fakes cover-up, all the various cover-ups, everybody knew, and the American public realized how bad it was when the first debate, the only debate Joe Biden did this cycle, demonstrated to the world his incapacity. Everybody knew. And what Scott said is true, what Bakari said is false, and everyone who says, the extent of his mental impairment wasn't known is lying to you or dumb. All right, you can be dumb as a post. That's possible. But you got to choose. Were you that dumb or are you lying? Because not to have observed his infirmity is to not to have paid attention and to have isolated yourself. And maybe your job, you perceive your job in the media as never upsetting Team Obama because the pod bros and everybody else jumps on anyone who says, well, he was impaired, because they set it all up. They were a party to the cover-up. But the fact is, there was a cover-up. It's 4 years old. It's the scandal of the year. Bethany Mandel is a wonderful author and a weekly guest. I hope she will migrate with me to the afternoons. Bethany, how are your afternoons? Because I'm moving on January 13th to 3 to 6 in the afternoon from the Beltway. Are you going to join me?
I'm so excited to not have to juggle with Seth with his morning commentary taping. Oh my God, it's going to be a whole new world.
All right, I am so looking forward to it. We'll figure out the best time for you. Speaking of Seth, I hope commentary calls an emergency podcast. I know they're supposed to be off for a couple of weeks, but the hagiography around Jimmy Carter is obscuring how anti-Israel the man became in his post-presidency. Are they going to do a special podcast on that?
John apparently was texting begging, and so Seth is always in. It might just be the two of them, but I think that they might do one. Don't hold me to it, but I think that there's some conversation.
What is your understanding? You know, you're too young to have been alive when Carter was president. I was in college. What is your understanding of Carter and Israel?
Very bad. I mean, he wrote a book calling Israel an apartheid state. It was funny because I saw your tweet about what we're going to plan on talking about, and I see a lot of similarities between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden as far as their long-term legacy. And his long-term legacy was that he left the region far more unsafe, far more unstable than, it was a month later when Ronald Reagan came into office.
So we will continue with the comparisons between Carter and Biden. Biden is much worse than Carter. Carter did a couple of good things because Anwar Sadat had courage. And Begin had courage. Let me read to you, I posted on X Jake Sullivan's comments about Joe Biden. Quote, "The president has been operating on a time horizon measured in decades, while the political cycle is measured in 4 years." Sullivan added that Biden's accomplishments by their nature will take a long time to bear fruit. Quote, "How to govern at this moment to set the U.S. up for long-term success has one answer, and how to govern to deal with midterm and presidential elections in the very short term might have a different answer. The president went with doing the things that really put America in a strong position." Bethany, what's your reaction to that nonsense?
I mean, he's national security advisor, so let's just look at that like national security bucket for a moment. If Israel had listened to anything that the Biden administration said, where would they be right now? Certainly not. Certainly not winning in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza, and beating back our shared enemy in Yemen. All of these folks are our shared enemies. He made the region much less safe. The only thing that made it possible for Israel to accomplish everything that it did was because Netanyahu stopped listening to him. And thank God President Trump is going to come back and will actually have a friend again in the White House who cares about containing this threat in the Middle East.
You know, Bethany, when I read that story, I have to go back and read it, make sure I'm not wrong about this. I was so stunned by that attempt to spin 4 years of failure that I didn't look to see if the reporter asked Jake Sullivan, "Do you feel any regret over the cover-up of the president's mental impairment?" Because everybody in that White House should be asked that every day that they appear on any panel. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Jan Crawford, I on ABC Meet the Press the other day, I guess it was yesterday, said, that was the most undercovered story was his mental and cognitive decline. And somebody on the panel actually said, well, he had a cold that day. And I have a cold today. All of your listeners can hear it. And yet I'm coherent. And yet I can put two thoughts together. Something that President Biden was not able to do. I didn't hear he had a cold in his voice, but I did see with my eyes and my ears that there was a couple fries short of a Happy Meal.
Yeah, he was infirm. He's been infirm for years. And what the Wall Street Journal revealed is that infirmity was well disguised in the first year, but then it became increasingly obvious that his physical infirmity was matched by a mental impairment that became so obvious in June. It's absolutely a lie to say you didn't see it. It's just a lie. I don't know how anyone can say that, Bethany.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying to know that he's still president and we don't know who is running the show. We have, another 3 weeks of hoping that nobody takes advantage of our weakness, but it's a massive weakness.
Yeah, his chief of staff, the First Lady, Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken have been running the country. Ron Klain was the first chief of staff. Jeff Zients is the second chief of staff. Donald Trump once told me the two most important jobs in Washington, D.C. are chief of staff in the White House and national security advisor in the White House. And he wonders why people want to be appointed and go through confirmation when they don't ask for those two jobs. Those two jobs, the chief of staff, they knew every day they dealt with the president, and they knew.
Yep. I look forward to the book that will one day come out, that they'll finally admit it. Oh, these were the lengths. This was the scary, steps that had to be taken to cover up the fact that it was Weekend at Bernie's for the last 4 years. Because that's the only way we're ever going to find out when someone has a financial incentive to sell a book and to tell all, because, they've been hiding it for the last 4 years. And it's one of the biggest scandals in American history.
Yeah, the best way to handle it. We'll have to talk in the break about how you would best handle this. Don't go anywhere, Mary. I'm talking to Bethany. I'll put it on YouTube. Would be to candidly admit, well, when he ran for president, I had a couple of concerns, but he overcame them. Then when he was elected president, it was in the best interest of the United States to hide his impairment and his infirmity because we couldn't have Kamala Harris as vice president as the American people saw and recognized. Bethany, if you are a Biden administration senior official, you're Karine Jean-Pierre, you're Jake Sullivan, you're Tony Blinken, you're Jeff Zients or Ron Klain, is my answer the best way to be candid after January 20th? Look, with the cards we were dealt, he was impaired, and we did the best we could because Kamala Harris couldn't be president.
Yeah, I mean, someone is going to write this tell-all book. I mean, I think it's who needs the money most, and they're going to try to shift blame onto everyone else. It's kind of like what Alyssa Farah did. She decided that she was going to absolve herself of her sins at the Trump administration by just throwing every single person under the bus and pretending like she had nothing to do with it. That's whoever.
I don't remember who Alyssa Farah is, Bethany.
Exactly.
Who is that?
She's on The View.
I don't know who she is.
She's on The View, and she worked for the vice president, and she acts like the Trump administration was this like singular evil, but she was part of the administration all 4 years, and now she's on The View. So I think we're going to see
that explains why I don't know her, because I have never watched 1 minute of The View that isn't a clip, and if she says something coherent, they won't post it as a clip because it's trolling for lefties. I do think history is going to be very harsh on everyone in this White House because someone will tell us, some deputy national security advisor, some deputy chief of staff, somebody will tell us, gosh, he was bonkers from the beginning.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the question is the way that, I mean, history should judge everyone in this White House harshly, but the question is there actually going to be an accountability? Is there going to be a reckoning of who knew what and who did what? And I mean, I don't know if the mainstream media is going to force that.
You know, I've said this many times, and Mediaite distorts it and other people distort it, but I've been saying it for weeks. They have to empty out the White House press room and change the chairs out. And if you served in the Biden years, the Trump people should say, unless you're named Ducey or Jackie, you don't have to come back. And there are a few other people who did a good job. But some of my friends are in that number. People like Peter Baker and Michael Scheer. They did not do a good job. They were buffaloed. That's the most charitable interpretation. So all of you are dismissed. Your network can send new people. But we only have 49 chairs here. And Ben Shapiro is getting one. And we're going to give one. By the way, I would give one to Bakari Sellers. I would give one to some leftists. But I want honestly ideological people, not pretend reporters. What do you think of that approach, Bethany?
I mean, I got those Google alerts too about the last segment that we did. All of them were all up in arms because you dared say that. But it's the reality. They missed the biggest story that was sitting right in front of them. We were hearing it from Secret Service people. I mean, DC is a small town and people talk. And I think that's the problem with covering this White House was because there was so much internal peer pressure among people who were working in the press corps at the White House that everyone was just, not saying it. How could you possibly throw out that right-wing conspiracy theory? And there's a lot of social pressure. I mean, I think you just need, to be honest, a lot of autistic people in there who just don't care about what anyone thinks about them and actually do their jobs.
I didn't know if you had noticed or not how much heat we got for talking about this. People want to cast Mediaite, of course, is just trash, but they wanted to characterize my opinion, and I think a little bit of yours, as being anti-First Amendment. I'm not. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. But the White House press room is not a free fire zone for the left wing, which it became for the last 4 years. It is for the president to use to communicate with the American people. And if the people in there aren't talented, find some talented people. That's not harsh, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, it's pro First Amendment to have people in there. The press is very important, and they didn't do their jobs for 4 years. We need better people in there who will do their jobs, because otherwise, what is it but a stenographer for the White House? We already have those. We don't need more.
So my view is, if you traveled with the president, if you got close to him, and this would include George Stephanopoulos because he did a couple of sit-downs with him, everyone who did the Radio City Music Hall event and the LA event, anyone who got a one-on-one with him, and you didn't tell us the truth, you're part of a scandal. Am I being too inclusive?
No, I think you're being too exclusive. I, as an American citizen who pays attention, you as an American citizen who pays attention, you and I were talking about this. We can pull the clips for years, and
Yeah.
they had a front row seat, and they weren't like, "Excuse me, I have a question. When was the last time he had a cognitive test?"
Yeah, I'm going to play in the next hour a greatest hits of people talking about how sharp he was. Let's close here, Bethany. In the future, if you are a White House staffer and the president is cognitively in decline, what ought you to do?
You ought to resign and go to a media organization who would actually report it.
Yes. That's it. You just go and say the 25th Amendment is there for this reason. The president is cognitively impaired. And leftists will now tweet at us and say, oh, well, that means Donald Trump. And no, it doesn't. He's not cognitively impaired. You don't like him. This isn't a question of liking someone or not liking him. It's not a question of how they present. It's a question of do they have the capacity to make informed decisions. And I really don't think Joe Biden has, at least since 2022 and probably in 2021. Last word to you, Bethany.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're going to spend the next 4 years crying wolf about there being cognitive decline. And who are they to say anything? They didn't say a word when it was clear and present. So, I mean, they're going to weaponize it. And there's going to continue to be news cycles about what happened with Biden as a book comes out. And so they're going to say, whoa, that's happening right now. And they're going to try to glob onto it and do the whataboutism stuff on Trump.
Absolute diversion from the real story and the real scandal. Bethany, Happy New Year to you and a happy Hanukkah. I celebrated Hanukkah a little bit with Dennis and Sue Prager yesterday, and I am sure you were enjoying it. I don't know. Do you have to give gifts every night to the kids?
We don't. No, we don't. It's not.
Good for
let's not
you.
go crazy.
That's emotionally exhausting to have to go through gift opening with any children, much less toddlers. Bethany Mandel over at X at Bethany. Sean Dark, please beg Seth to collapse and do the emergency pod. Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
Joined by Jets fan Jim Garrity, who has been watching the Jets give away a pole position in the draft, and the Browns steadily move up on the draft board. They're now in the third position, and we are desperately hoping for the Patriots or the Giants to win next week. Jim Garrity, what do you think? Did the Jets blow their chance to get a quarterback? Uh-oh. He's on mute. Maybe that's the fact that the Jets fans have collectively lost their voice. Maybe it's because the Jets fans have decided that their team is so bad they don't even know how to be bad anymore. If you are just joining us and you didn't watch the NFL yesterday, let me know when Jim is back, okay, Adam? Oh, you're back. Jim the Jets fan. Did they manage to blow the draft?
No. As I started saying, and I think you just didn't want to hear me, Hugh. I was speaking. You had your ears blocked. The Raiders and Giants are going to take quarterbacks. You guys also. Whatever happened to I don't want a running quarterback of like a whole week ago? Did the moment it
well,
got,
Cam Ward turns out to be.
those...
Cam Ward turns out to be, I'm told, not a running quarterback. I want you to go over and look at Tankathon though. Tankathon.com.
Well,
the season we're third. The Browns are third. I couldn't believe it after the NFL collapsed yesterday, and the Browns, for a moment there, they were daring to be tied with the Bengals. I thought the Browns can't possibly be as bad as the Jets at blowing their draft position. Now, if I'm the Browns, I play the D squad on Sunday. Do you tank?
You guys have a D squad? How can you tell?
But we're ready to go. I'm all for Cam. I do not want Sanders. I do not want Sanders. He runs around. He's too little. It'll get broken.
So yesterday, so at one point the Bills are up 40-0 on the Jets, and I'm watching the game with my kids, and we're
were?
All right. We go to every Sunday, or we'll go to this restaurant that's got TVs everywhere, and we'll watch the game.
But you can leave, You can leave early.
Down, like early in the second half, we're like, okay, screw it, we're out of here. And they're down 40-0, and I follow a whole bunch of people, including a bunch of Bills fans, who I allegedly they're decent human beings, and allegedly they're good people. I'll give them credit for it. This is the wrong
I have
morning
not had
to
that.
ask me.
That's a rumor and a report. That's
and one
a
of them
scandal.
said, so the Jets come back in garbage time. Tyrod Taylor goes in at quarterback, and they score 2 touchdowns. And it's like, and so one of the Bills fans starts complaining, saying, "Look, I've been happy all day, but can I get some defense here?" And I said, "Look, not only have you guys pulled the starters, not only have you guys pulled the backups of the B team, not only have you pulled the C team, you're just letting kids in the stands come in, put on Bills uniforms, and play a quarter against the Jets." So that's why they scored, right? It's kind of a Make-A-Wish day where a kid gets to actually put on the uniform and play at a game. And the Jets only scored 2 touchdowns against them. So you got to cut them a little bit of slack for that end of the game stuff.
Well, I know, but Aaron Rodgers, apparently they're going to stick with him, and he's managed to get Garrett Wilson mad at him. And I enjoy the drama over at Jetsland. And I just want the Giants and the who's in the first position? It's not the Raiders.
Patriots.
I got to go.
Patriots.
Who? Patriots. They're not going to draft a quarterback, right? They might trade down, but they're not going to draft. I think Drake May wants that Hunter guy from Colorado,
if you're
right?
the Raiders, you do whatever it takes to get that first pick. So my guess, every year the quarterbacks go high. As much they're always this desperate rush for quarterbacks. So my suspicion is that Ward and Sanders will go 1-2. And
that's what I think too.
I'm sure everyone's like, "Did I tune into sports radio? Don't these guys usually talk politics?" I'm fine with
No,
this.
we do. I'm getting to it. Here's my political question. On a scale of 1 to 10, the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental impairment, with 10 being the worst scandal of our lifetimes, which until now was probably Watergate, and 0 being no scandals, no ethical problem whatsoever, might have been incompetent, but nothing wrong with Jimmy Carter. There were no special counsel, but it was about his chief of staff, and it wasn't true. Where does the cover-up of Biden's impairment rank?
A 9. If you want to say it's a 10, you can say it's a 10. I can't put it lower than an 8. I think the most revealing piece, and this is a upcoming column in that other place besides National Review, that Biden, the reporting that Biden believes he could have won the race if he had not withdrawn, and that he just had one bad night, and he's still walking around saying he shouldn't have withdrawn, and he would have had this miraculous comeback. And look, we can point to a lot of mistakes that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz made, but in the end, they had 1 point. She was younger, she was energetic. I think she actually did very well in the debate against Trump. And they had $1.5 billion. And you're telling me Joe Biden's going to perform better than that when he's mumbling and stumbling and, hey, Hugh, you think we're going to get a end of presidency press conference from this president? My guess is no.
No.
Right.
No. We're not going to get anything from this.
Heard of. Yeah.
But did you read the Jake Sullivan? Did you read the Jake Sullivan comment? The Washington Post, by the way, I want to promote your columns. You can name it here. It's not like Voldemort. Okay. Just because I quit doesn't mean I don't read it. So I'll be reading your column, but I want to quote to you what Jake Sullivan had the temerity to say to the Post on the weekend, which was, the president has been operating on a time horizon measured in decades, while the political cycle is measured in 4 years, Jake Sullivan told the Post. He added, how to govern at this moment, to set the U.S. up for long-term success has one answer. And how to govern to deal with midterm and presidential elections in the very short term might have a very different answer. The president went with doing the things that really put America in a strong position. What do you think of that, Jim?
First of all, the video people, I have resisted making some really off-color gestures. I could do sign language for bovine excrement. I could do that one for you if you want. But so I have, so as your listeners probably know, I go to Ukraine. I've been there twice, probably going back again. And I have some buddies out there, and they are not impressed with the Biden administration. The pace of arms getting over there, you can fire it here, but you can't fire it there. And one of the things that I heard that's always stuck in my head from my buddy Stephen Moore, who runs an aid group helping out the Ukrainians, he says Jake Sullivan should be working at Chipotle. That's the level of contempt he keeps Jake Sullivan in. And by the way, if you're a Democrat, how does it feel to hear the president's national security advisor saying, look, everything we were doing, you're going to see dividends. You're going to see it pay off 4 decades from now. Isn't it kind of reasonable for the American people to expect some results within that 4-year window? Isn't that why presidential terms are 4 years? Is that, you can say you inherit a lot of problems from the previous guy. You can say, oh, it's going to take some time. but 4 years is a really reasonable time frame to expect some return on investment. And the fact
Jim,
that
let's be upbeat.
Yeah.
Is there an achievement? What are they going to put in the Biden library? Is there an achievement?
They're going to talk about the response to COVID, rolling out the vaccines. They're going to forget the vaccine mandates and the fact that they fired people if they wouldn't get the vaccines. They'll talk about the early response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They won't mention Afghanistan. They will not. They'll say there was no war between the U.S. and China. They'll try to make it sound like Biden was a hawk, even though he really was on China, even though he wasn't. They'll talk about the deportations and that happened at the very end of his presidency. Right last couple of months before he was facing re-election. And you'll hear a lot about how bad Harris was. And if Harris had just pulled it, what I loved is that the article which says Biden could have won, but only he's saying how everything they did wrong, but he didn't want to criticize Kamala Harris. It's like
there is
I could have done it.
achievement.
I'm not saying she stinks. I'm just saying I could have done what she couldn't do.
Do you believe that news reporters will press Biden alums on what did they know and when did they know it?
Probably not, but I'll bet we'll get if you're a Biden, if you're Jake Sullivan, if you're a do you think anybody wants to hear about? And then I met with the Ukrainians, and they wanted to strike the Russians over there, and I said no, that would be escalatory. And then they pointed out that they'd fired a missile into a children's hospital, and I was like, well, look, we don't want to make the things worse. We don't want to make them fire 2 missiles into a children's hospital. There's not going to be anything anybody wants to if you're a Biden administration official and you want to write your memoirs, this is what people are going to want to hear about. This is what's going to sell you. This is what's going to generate the buzz. So maybe in the books we'll get stories about, I went into, by the way, according to the Wall Street Journal article, they were canceling meetings on national security in spring of 2021. From the very beginning.
It's a huge scandal that American history will look back on and say is probably the worst failure of the press in American history. Jim, what were you going to say? We went to break there.
So we can rightfully argue about the press's lack of curiosity, the lack of reporting, the downplaying of it. 3 years into his presidency, the New York Times said, hey, we noticed the president almost never has events before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m., indicating that he's got about 6 good hours in him in a day, 5 days a week. But the thing is that certainly by 2023, if not earlier, Americans, large majorities of Americans and significant portions of Democrats were saying Joe Biden is too old to be president. And no, we don't want him to run for another term. So it's a cover-up that didn't work. We could all see him. We could all hear him. I was writing about after Afghanistan with withdrawal, the degree to which he was not addressing the public, disappearing for days. The White House records indicated he only had 2 phone calls with foreign leaders in a 10-day period. There was this question of what's he doing all that time that we can't see him? And Americans picked up on this pretty darn fast. So as terrible as this is, and as ludicrous as this is, it was gaslighting. It was very much, Karine Jean-Pierre, he has so much energy, I can't keep up with him. I think it was was it Lisa Rochester, the member of Congress from Delaware, who said, oh my goodness, he's got more energy now than when I first met him and he was in his 40s or 50s. Utterly nonsense, but I don't think anybody believed it, which is why this is this bizarreness. And one of the really fascinating conversation that will come out of this, Hugh, is the question of what is the 25th Amendment for? If you don't invoke it in circumstances like this, why do you have it? And is there some way that somebody who isn't dependent upon remaining in the good graces of the president to argue that it should be invoked because in a way that makes it happen? Traditionally, you'd expect somebody like Kamala Harris to say, hey, the president can't remember what he was told in his briefing yesterday. He shouldn't be president anymore. I hate to do this, but I think we got to step in.
Jim, most amendments, I teach the 25th in common law, and most amendments are fighting the last war. And the last war, when they passed the 25th Amendment, was Woodrow Wilson in a coma, right? With a stroke. That's what they were worried about, a non-ambulatory president. They were not aware of the possibility of a president with mental impairment who had 5 or 6 good hours in him. I don't think he did, by the way. But he's never gotten through one interview without making a mistake. So I don't think he's even had 5 to 6 good hours. It's just been relative to his worst moments. So the 25th Amendment is not written for this because it's so unwieldy and so long and drawn out. It probably needs amendment But I don't think we're ever going to amend the Constitution again. Do you?
It's tough. You again, you would need a really broad bipartisan consensus. And wasn't the last? I'm speaking to exactly the right guy to correct me. Wasn't the last amendment that Congress can't vote itself a pay raise? That if you vote a pay raise, it takes effect for the next Congress?
Yeah, but that's an old amendment. The last modern amendment, that just hung around forever, and then they voted it in.
Okay.
It was supposed to be in the original package. The one that is the most recent, I believe, is the 18-year-old vote. I only have one amendment. When people start talking about constitutional amendments, I turn them off because they're so unwieldy. But when we come back from break, I will propose to you the one constitutional amendment that I think might pass. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Jim, here's my proposed constitutional amendment. I just turn people off when they say we need a constitutional amendment because you can't pass them. My proposed constitutional amendment is exempting those currently in these offices, no president, vice president, or justice of the Supreme Court, or chief justice of the Supreme Court shall serve beyond their X birthday, period. What do you think?
What number are you envisioning X?
Either 75 or 80.
Okay. I think, marking the passage of Jimmy Carter at age 100, and the fact that we are next month going to nominate a 78-year-old president who will turn.
You mean inaugurate? Inaugurate.
Yeah. Inaugurate, yeah. That this is going to be a real issue for America. Like, the good news is human lifespan is getting longer. And the longer you are in public life, the more name recognition you have. And it probably helps you to be a really well-known figure with a long record of accomplishments. And that's, one of the reasons we've had, I would say 3 old presidents in a row, but really I mean 2, but like 3 terms of very old presidents. And also remember, who was the last guy who Joe Biden beat in the 2020 primary? Bernie Sanders, the one guy who could say both these guys are youngsters, we are in an era where, as much, Nancy Pelosi, she's not speaker, but clearly she's still pulling the strings of the Democratic Party. You look at the committee chairs. Yeah, the Democrats replaced a few ranking members who are younger, but they still have a bunch of, Maxine Waters is still there and all that stuff. We have a geriatric governing class. The issue with the Congresswoman from Texas, who was in the retirement.
A Republican, Kay Granger.
Okay, thank you. This is a real problem. The people who hang on, Dianne Feinstein, people who hang on in public office long after they shouldn't, and staffers who are dependent upon that lawmaker, who you think would be the ones who would say, it's time for, the person should be in a home, not in the house. That kind of, but they weren't willing to do it. So it may require some sort of that. And it's my attitude towards the recent spate of bad pardons we've seen from and commutations from Biden. I'm now open to a discussion about limiting the president's pardon power, because it used to be norms, social standards, fear of scandal or negative reaction. All of that would be a check on bad decision making in this. You'd think a person would be like, well, wouldn't it be embarrassing to be a U.S. senator or a member of the House and not able to do the job because you're mentally and physically no longer capable? And clearly that's not an issue. Now here's the thing. Chuck Grassley, he's 90, I want to say, and he's still
91.
91, right? But the problem with the age limit is that occasionally you'll get somebody who's really still spry and mentally sharp.
And they should serve in the Senate. They should serve in the Senate or the House, because it's not they're deliberative bodies, they're legislators. Yeah, one of 100 or one of 435. But with justices, presidents, and vice presidents, and Trump, by the way, can make this amendment because he's a uniquely energetic individual, and he's not in any kind of decline. You might not like him. I know a lot of people listening don't like him, but there's no question about he's the same Donald Trump that he was 40 years ago. And by the way, I have a clip from Letterman in 1987, which I'm going to play in the long segment at the bottom of the hour. There just isn't any question he's got the energy. He could propose this amendment. Do you think it would pass? Exempting current occupants of these offices, no president, vice president, or justice of the Supreme Court or chief justice shall serve beyond their 80th birthday. You think that would get the necessary number of states?
No pun intended. If you grandfather in the ones who are in place, I think you'd get it. I think that there's enough Americans who are concerned, and there are enough recent examples. Biden would be the most vivid and demonstrated one. But look, we have a president who isn't there. I think there was the president who isn't there was Peggy Noonan's title of her column this past weekend, comparing Biden to Woodrow
Fine
Wilson.
column. Yeah.
You have the vice president who, disappeared for long stretches as well, and who apparently didn't like to do interviews and was hidden from the press for long stretches. You have the Secretary of Defense who went off to have cancer. I hope he's doing surgery. I hope he's doing really well. God bless him. I hope Lloyd Austin lives to be 100 and lives to be healthy. But was off, and nobody knew where he was. Who's running the show? How many government officials in a row in the chain of command can you have inaccessible and not like? And the funny thing is, like, it's not like I feel like it feels like almost like we need Big Brother. Like this idea, I mean, the game show, not Orwell. The idea of like these cameras watching people, because when we can't watch them, what are they up to?
Jim Garrity, I want to add one more line to my proposed constitutional amendment and ask you whether or not it would kill it. And the number of justices on the Supreme Court is fixed at 9. Now, I happen to believe there's a good argument that it's already unconstitutional to expand the court. Good argument, untested. And people will say, well, they expanded the court after the 14th Amendment. But I don't think that would answer my objection about overturning the rule of law, which an expansion of the court clearly would, and was understood to be when FDR proposed court packing in 1938, and it was roundly rejected by both parties. But I do worry that uber partisans, when Democrats return, and they will get back to the White House eventually, are going to blow up the filibuster and expand the court after 4 more years of Roberts Court decisions. What do you think about fixing in the fine print the court is 9, and we mean 9, not 8, not 10?
Is it safe to assume, Hugh, you want these as separate constitutional amendments?
No, I was going to then. I don't think this would have any chance standing alone. But if you join it with the age limits, it might get over.
First of all, I think you actually would get wide public support. Whether you'd get enough in every state legislature that would need to ratify it is maybe an open question. But whatever offense is there, we should be looking at why did Chesterton put it there, and that question, like, so why was there such a strong reaction to FDR attempting to pack the court? Why is there this instinctive reaction when somebody says, well, we're not getting what we want from the court, so we're just going to add more justices and we'll vote the way we want, right? Why does that offend us so? Why does that bother us so? It's because the whole concept of our government is checks and balances. And the moment the president and a like-minded, Senate majority can start popping out new justices like a Pez dispenser, well, then you've eliminated the checks and balance. The Supreme Court no longer is a useful tool to say to the president and legislature, nope, sorry, you can't do that. You have violated the Constitution. Right? My former colleague Kevin Williamson once said, he won over a crowd, I think on the Bill Maher program, back in the bad old days, where he said, everything in the Bill of Rights is everything that's so important, you idiots don't get to vote on it. And it's a really kind of, the idea, because we go, we believe in democracy. We believe that, the people's will, the people should speak, the people should get what they want. And what's fascinating is that our Constitution is set up like, no, there are a handful of things that you, the majority, don't get, even if you really want it very badly. You don't get to abrogate the First Amendment. You don't get to do away with the Second Amendment. No, you can't just ignore it, even though a lot of jurisdictions effectively did before the Heller decision. You can't, the Fourth, like all these things that are in there, we make it really hard to change this almost impossible ability to change the Constitution, because there are certain things that we know that the public gets these things wrong every now and then. We know that there are public frenzies. We know some people would argue the Patriot Act was that. Some people, a terrible disaster happens and people want to do something about it, and they enact changes that are actually very bad in retrospect. So that's why we have the system that we do. When people complain how hard it is to pass legislation, yes, that's the point. It's supposed to be hard.
Yeah, the Constitution is anti-majoritarian. I spend 30 classes explaining that again and again. The Constitution is anti-majoritarian. I want to close here, Jim. I don't believe any constitutional amendment will ever pass, and I don't believe this is a priority. But should someone drop something like this in the hopper to begin to consider it?
Yeah, the lesson of constitutional amendments is that, they take a while, and you have to. What it takes is to change the Constitution, you need a really big consensus. You need to convince, not quite everyone, but you need to convince a large majority of Americans, and it's reflected through the number of states and the number of state legislative majorities you would need. And you need to get started on it, and you need to have a patience, and you need to be willing to accept the fact that it may not succeed the first time. There are probably some elderly state legislators out there who don't think it's such a good idea to put in an age limit for certain jobs. But people always point out that, there's a reason we have age limits for commercial airline pilots. And you don't want the elderly commercial airline pilot making a terrible mistake that costs people lives. Same thing, you don't want an elderly president making decisions that will cost somebody their lives. And also, look, I've never related more to Ruth Bader Ginsburg than that time she fell asleep at the State of the Union. But in the end, if you're the kind of person who can't function after, was it 8 p.m., 9 p.m., you probably should not be one of the 9 most important people in terms of determining what is constitutional and what is not. But
there's a First Circuit vacancy. There's a First Circuit vacancy that I'd like to have, but I'm 69. I'm not going to be it. Jim Garrity, thank you. I'll look for your post article later today, and I'll read you at the Morning Jolt. Jim Garrity on X. Out in Studio West, reminding everyone, do not be surprised, do not be alarmed when I am not here on January 13th. I have simply moved to afternoon drive in the East, 3 to 6 p.m., across these many wonderful stations, noon to 3 on the West Coast. I'm so excited because Inside Radio works this way. If you've got morning drive in the East, you've got the most influence in the world for half the country. If you've got morning drive in the West, you've got influence on half the country. If you have afternoon drive in the East, you have influence across the entire country. Now, I'm really looking forward to that. I care a great deal about California. I lived here from 1989 to 2016. I come back often to teach, and all my kids grew up here, and they've all left. And I'm concerned about California. I'll cover it a little bit more than I have in the past. John Campbell will be back. Lilacs will be back. They're not morning people. They didn't want to get up in the morning like I do. And come January 13th, we're moving to the afternoon, looking very much forward to that. Some things can't wait. So first of all, I want to remind you about media coverage of Joe Biden's impairment over especially the last year. Here's a montage, cut 14.
Does the president have the stamina, physically and mentally, do you think, to continue on even after 2024?
Don, you're asking me this question. Oh my gosh, he's the president of the United States. I can't even keep up with him.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
I can testify because I've been working very closely with this president for the past 2 years. I've been knowing him for 30 years. And I'm telling you, this guy's tough. He's smart. He's on his game.
Joe Biden has vision. He has knowledge. He has a strategic thinker.
The president is focused. He's detail-oriented. He's always thinking about the big picture.
He is engaging. He is capable. He has an incredible record as president.
And I'm often with him on foreign trips. He's at the top of his game.
So he has a vision. He has knowledge. He has judgment. He has a strategic thinking.
I met with the president, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he seemed fine to me.
I have complete confidence in the president. I have watched him expertly guide meetings of staff and cabinet members. I could not have more confidence in the president.
I would just tell you that I meet frequently with the president, and every single time I meet with him, he is just fine.
But he is, again, knowledgeable, wise.
Incredibly sharp, incredibly probing, incredible command of the details.
He is sharp. He is on top of things.
There is nothing to these challenges, these suggestions that somehow he's not sharp and he's not capable.
We see Joe Biden up close. We know how attuned he is to the issue.
And you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has.
I say his age is an asset.
Aha! He's wise.
Yes, he's wise. He has wisdom. He has experience.
And his experience, because of his age and his wisdom, has been invaluable to this country.
A lot of countries, people who've been in office a longer period of time are praised for their wisdom.
I have seen a lot of 72-year-olds not as capable as this 80-year-old.
It is hard for us to keep up with this president.
His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. He's fine. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
And this kind of sense that he's not ready for this job is just a bucket of BS that's so deep, your boots will get stuck in.
Yeah.
All right, so that is the supercut. Here's Jan Crawford on Face the Nation with Major Garrett yesterday, cut number 15.
One of the things we
threats,
also
death
do in the
threats.
year-end correspondence roundtable is dig into what was undercovered or underreported. Jan?
Undercovered, underreported. That would be, to me, Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline that became undeniable in the televised debate.
At the presidential debate with Donald Trump.
Unquestioned. And, you know, it's starting to emerge now that his advisors kind of managed his limitations. It's been reported in the Wall Street Journal for 4 years. And yet he insisted that he could still run for president. We should have much more forcefully questioned whether he was fit for office for another 4 years, which could have led to a primary for the Democrats. It could have changed the scope of the entire election. Yet, still, incredibly, we read in the Washington Post that his advisors are saying that he regrets that he dropped out of the race. You know, that he thinks he could have beaten Trump. And I think that is either delusional or they're gaslighting.
President
American
Biden
people.
has said repeatedly he was sick during the debate June 27th in Atlanta, and he's always been fine, and he leaves fine. That is his position, the position of many of his top aides as well, even though there is that reporting.
Robert Costa.
Just stop for that. Even though Robert is a friend of the show, he's a friend of mine. I've known him forever. Even though there is that reporting, it is a fact that the President of the United States has mental impairment. It has been a fact for a long time. We have known about his physical infirmity for 4 years. I mean, I've been saying it for 4 years. You've been saying it. I wrote last February, he needs to resign because it's obvious. Everyone who was near him, who did an interview with him, should confess error, should reverse the long-standing bad precedent of what happened here, and go on the warpath and apologize. Chris Cillizza has done so, good for him. But let's not forget, June 14th, 2024, Nancy Cortez on the CBS Evening News. That was CBS Face the Nation yesterday. Here is June 19th, before the first debate, Nancy Cortez with Rona Tarrant, cut number 16.
You've probably heard of deep fakes, but just last week, as President Biden was at the G7 summit in Italy, cheap fake clips went viral on social media and were picked up by some news outlets. Take a look at this clip, for example. It shows Biden and other world leaders watching a skydiving demonstration before the president is seen walking away and looking in another direction. Outlets claimed that he was sort of just aimlessly wandering away. The clip amassed millions of views within just a few hours, when actually if you widen out, you can see that he was talking to one of the members of the military that was participating in that demonstration. So how prevalent are cheap fakes? And how big of a problem will they be in this election? Well, let's take a look with executive editor of CBS News Confirmed, Rona Tarrant, who joins us now from Studio 57 to explain. Hi, Rona. It's great to see you.
Hi.
So tell us how long cheap fakes have been around. I'm assuming they've been around since the beginning of the media, because, anybody can take an image and manipulate it to make it look like it suggests something that didn't happen.
That's exactly it. It really is a case of old techniques meets new technology. So, as you said, cheap fake videos, and that's videos that are edited in a really simple way. Those have been around as long as political videos have existed. So there's a few ways, for example, that people might be familiar with. One is there might be a long video and you might take a very short clip and you take out key context. Mm-hmm. Another is maybe you slow something down and it makes it sound like someone is slurring their words. Or another is you might splice several pieces together and it makes it sound like someone said something that they didn't. What's different in this election and the last two elections, in the presidential elections, is number one, everyone has access to mobile phones where they can edit. And number two, most people have social media accounts where they can publish this stuff. So it's worth saying these are not anything new. You know, when Trump was president, these targeted him as well. But what we are seeing in the last few weeks is really the steady stream of videos that are targeting President Biden, and in particular, taking aim at his age.
Right, and they are being picked up by news outlets that know they're fakes and or know that they are misleading, but post them anyway. Rona, is there any way to measure the impact that these videos could have on the 2024 election in comparison to other forms of misinformation?
You know, that's a really great question. I think, in terms of what our team has been tracking, we have seen these so-called cheap fake videos. They are targeting Biden and they are targeting Trump. However, we have seen, particularly in the last few months, the videos targeting Biden are getting a lot more traction online, and in particular, the ones that target Biden's age. So, for example, like you had said, claiming that he is wandering off and really was having a conversation with somebody. These videos are effective because they're called cheap fakes for a reason. They are quick. They're easy to publish, and oftentimes they have big impact on people who are just scrolling through their phones. They watch it for 5 seconds and they move on. Also, what's interesting about this is we've heard a lot about the fear of deepfakes in this election. And we've seen that deepfakes haven't really shown up in the way that maybe people were worried about them showing up. But these videos that are edited in a really basic way with technology that's been around for a long time are effective to the extent that the White House is addressing them.
Deepfakes, as opposed to cheap fakes, are videos or audio that has been completely created by AI. So think the robocall that was sent around to New Hampshire voters a few months ago that sounded just like Joe Biden telling them not to vote, but it was a total fake. So, Rona, how can voters best discern between videos that are real and videos that are not?
So social media platforms, sometimes they will attach fact checks to these videos. So sometimes on X you might see community notes, or on Facebook you might see fact checks. However, the reality is, for the vast majority of them, they're not going to have anything attached. So unfortunately, it really is on the viewer. Number one piece of advice I would have is always check your sources. So if you see something on an account, is this a partisan account? Is it pushing for a particular candidate? And does it have a history of posting misinformation? And the second thing, which I think is really important, is always seek another source. So don't just take it from one account. Make sure that you get a second source or even a third source. And most importantly, make sure that's a credible source.
And CBS.
I want you to understand what we just played there. The supercut, yesterday's conversation, and then that from June demonstrates, and we're going to post it. It's just the receipts. Media was in on it from the beginning, from the basement campaign to the end, when no one is even pretending the president is compos mentis. And he does manage to mumble a few words into the teleprompter. He did so in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He will get through the inauguration. He is not governing. He has not been governing for years. The legacy media participated in the cover-up. They are participating still because they are not honestly reporting that they were, in fact, complicit in the cover-up. The greatest media scandal in the legacy media in history. Prior to this, it was Rathergate, for which Dan Rather lost his job when they invented the story about George W. Bush in the 2004 campaign. This 4-year-old cover-up is now the worst media scandal in American history. There is no second place.